My family made a secret group chat to bet on how fast I'd empty my life savings if they faked mom's death, then spent it on a cruise without me. When I confronted them, she just smiled and said, "We knew you'd want us to enjoy ourselves instead of worrying about money." I didn't say a word. That was 11 months ago. This morning, my brother was arrested, 2 states away using a fake name, and my mom was crying to strangers in a motel lobby about her heartless son. My family has always had this unspoken rule that since I'm the only one without kids, I'm somehow responsible for bailing everyone else out. Over the years, I've paid for car repairs, medical bills, and countless emergencies that always seem to happen right when I was doing well financially. I told myself it was what family does for each other. At least that's what I used to think. 3 months ago, my sister called me sobbing. Mom had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition and needed surgery immediately. The insurance wouldn't cover everything, and they were looking at a $15,000 gap. Dad had already maxed out his credit cards, and my brother was still recovering from his own financial disaster last year. They needed help, and they needed it fast. The calls came daily after that. Mom, weak and trembling, telling me she understood if I couldn't help it, that she was scared about what would happen if they had to wait. Dad, proud as always, actually choking up as he explained they might have to postpone the surgery indefinitely. My sister sent me photos from the hospital. Mom hooked up to monitors looking frail and terrified. The doctors were saying time was critical. I had been saving for a house down payment for 3 years. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every night eating ramen instead of ordering takeout, it all went into that account. $18,000. My entire future sitting there, waiting for me to finally buy my own place and stop renting forever. But what choice did I have? This was my mother's life we were talking about. I transferred every penny the next morning. They were so grateful it almost made me cry. Mom actually sobbed when I told her the money was on its way, saying I was saving her life. Dad hugged me for the first time in years, telling me he was proud to have raised such a selfless son. My sister posted on Facebook about what an amazing brother she had, and the whole extended family was praising me for stepping up when it mattered most. For once in my life, I felt like the family hero instead of just the family ATM. 2 weeks later, I was feeling good about myself despite being completely broke. Sure, I was back to square one financially, but I had saved my mother's life. I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and couldn't afford to go out with friends, but it was worth it. That's when my cousin Jay called me, excited about something he'd seen on social media. He'd spotted photos on my brother's Instagram story. The whole family, mom, dad, my sister, my brother, and all their kids, on what looked like a massive cruise ship. Tropical drinks by the pool, formal dinners in elegant dining rooms, excursions to private islands. The photos were dated from just 2 days ago. Jake was confused because he thought mom was supposed to be recovering from major heart surgery. My stomach dropped to the floor. I hung up and immediately went to my brother's Instagram. There they were, dozens of photos and videos from what was clearly an expensive week-long cruise. Mom looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, dancing on the deck and posing with cocktails. The whole family was having the time of their lives on what had to be a several $1,000 vacation. I drove straight to my parents' house, screenshots ready on my phone. Mom answered the door with a perfect hand and a guilty expression that told me everything I needed to know. When I showed her the photos, she didn't even try to deny it. She just sighed deeply and said they figured I'd find out eventually, but they were hoping it would be after they got back. There was no heart condition, no surgery, no medical emergency at all. Mom had gotten a routine checkup 3 months ago, and they'd used her normal appointment paperwork to create fake medical bills with Dad's printer and some creative photo editing. They'd been planning this family reunion cruise for over 6 months, a luxury trip that I was deliberately excluded from because they needed someone to fund it. My sister tried to justify it by saying they all deserved a vacation after working so hard all their lives. Dad said I made more money than any of them, so it wasn't like I'd really missed the $18,000. Mom actually had the nerve to say they knew I'd want them to enjoy themselves instead of worrying about money, and that I should be happy they used my gift for something that brought the whole family together. But here's the part that really destroyed me. My brother, maybe feeling guilty or maybe just hammered on post-vacation confidence, pulled out his phone and showed me a group chat from 6 months ago. The whole family had been planning this elaborate scheme for months. They were joking about how gullible I was, making bets about how fast I'd hand over the money when they played the dying mother card, and laughing about how I always fell for their sob stories. I stared at those messages for a long time. Messages about how I was such a sucker and how easy it always is to get money out of him. They'd even joked about what other fake emergencies they could create in the future. My own family had turned scamming me into a group activity. I walked out of that house without saying another word, but I wasn't done, not even close. They had no idea what they'd unleashed, because being the family's personal ATM for years had taught me a lot about all of their finances, and I had access to information they definitely didn't want getting out. What I did next didn't just get my money back, it completely destroyed their lives. I can't finish it here. I knew exactly where to start. My sister had been bragging on social media for years about her successful online boutique, but I'd helped her with the books when she first started. She'd never changed her passwords, and I still had access to her business accounts. What I found there was exactly what I expected. Years of unreported income, cash transactions she'd hidden from the IRS, and personal expenses she'd written off as business costs. My brother's situation was even more interesting. He'd been running a side business fixing cars in his garage, all cash deals that he'd never reported. I had photos from family gatherings showing dozens of cars in various stages of repair, plus text messages where he'd asked me to help move money around to avoid complications. He'd also been collecting unemployment while working this side gig, something the state would definitely want to know about. But it was my parents who had the most to lose. Dad had been doing under-the-table contracting work for years, and Mom had been selling her homemade crafts online that were actually cheap imports she relabeled. They'd been hiding money in multiple accounts, some under fake names, and I knew about all of them because they'd used me as a reference when opening them. I spent the next week gathering everything: screenshots, bank statements, photos, text messages, years of evidence that painted a very clear picture of a family that had been scamming more than just me. They'd been cheating the system for years while crying poverty whenever they needed something from me. The first move was subtle. I created anonymous email accounts and started sending my sister's biggest clients proof that she was reselling cheap knockoffs as handmade originals. Within days, her reviews tanked and refund requests started pouring in. She called me crying about how someone was trying to destroy her business, never suspecting it was me sitting across from her at Mom's kitchen table, offering sympathy while forwarding more evidence to angry customers. My brother's comeuppance came next. An anonymous tip to the unemployment office included photos of him working on cars with timestamps, showing he was claiming benefits while earning cash. The investigation started immediately, and suddenly he was facing not just repayment of benefits, but potential fraud charges. He was at my apartment within hours, begging me to lend him money for a lawyer. I told him I was broke because I'd given everything to Mom's surgery. The look on his face when he realized the irony was priceless. My parents required a more delicate touch. I couldn't go after them directly without revealing my involvement, so I got creative. I started leaving subtle hints around their social circle about their financial situation. A comment here about Dad's new truck. A question there about Mom's expensive jewelry. Soon, their friends were asking uncomfortable questions about how they could afford such nice things if they'd needed their son to pay for emergency surgery. The real blow came when I anonymously sent their church evidence of the cruise photos dated during Mom's supposed recovery. The same church where they'd asked for prayers and donations for her life-saving surgery. The congregation that had held fundraisers and bake sales to help with medical expenses. Suddenly, they were persona non grata at the place they'd attended for 20 years. But I wasn't satisfied with just social consequences. I wanted my money back. That's when I remembered the family reunion planned for next month at my aunt's lake house. Every year, the whole extended family gathered for a weekend of barbecues and bonding. This year would be different. I had plans that would make their cruise look like a bargain vacation. I started by calling my aunt, expressing concern about Mom's recovery, and suggesting we should make this reunion extra special for her. My aunt, who hadn't been told about the fake surgery, was confused but eager to help. I convinced her to let me handle the planning and, more importantly, the deposits for the rental properties and catering. Then I called each family member individually. I told my sister the reunion was canceled due to drama between other relatives. I told my brother it had been postponed indefinitely. I gave my parents a fake date 2 weeks later than the actual event. Each person got a different story, and I made sure to ask them to keep it quiet to avoid family drama. The real reunion went ahead as planned. Every cousin, aunt, uncle, and distant relative showed up, except for my immediate family. The story started coming out quickly. My cousin Jake mentioned the cruise photos to my aunt. Another relative asked about Mom's surgery and was shocked to learn it was fake. By the end of the weekend, the entire extended family knew about the scam. My parents found out when they showed up 2 weeks later to an empty lake house and a bill for the rental they'd supposedly prepaid. The owner informed them that their son had canceled their reservation and received a full refund. The same thing happened with the catering, the boat rentals, and every other expense they thought they'd covered. My sister discovered the truth when customers started asking why she'd missed the craft fair she'd paid to vendor at, another event I'd helpfully canceled on her behalf, pocketing the refund. My brother's revelation came when the classic car he'd bought at auction turned out to be a lemon because I'd outbid him on the actual car he wanted and bought a look-alike rust bucket to swap in its place. Each discovery led to frantic family group texts that I watched with satisfaction. They were turning on each other, accusing one another of sabotage, not realizing it was me pulling every string. Mom blamed Dad for not being careful enough with the cruise photos. Dad blamed my brother for posting them. My brother blamed my sister for probably running her mouth. My sister accused Mom of being too greedy with the whole scheme. The implosion was beautiful to watch, but I still didn't have my money back. That's when Mom made her biggest mistake. In desperation, she tried the same trick again, this time claiming Dad needed emergency gallbladder surgery. She even sent fake medical bills to the extended family, hoping to recoup some of their losses. But now everyone knew their game. Not only did no one contribute, but my aunt forwarded the emails to me with a note saying she couldn't believe they were trying this again. I had everything I needed. I compiled all the evidence, the fake medical bills, the cruise photos, the text messages from their planning group chat, the proof of their various tax frauds and scams. I put it all in a neat folder and invited them over for dinner. They arrived expecting another confrontation, or maybe an opportunity to guilt me into helping with their mounting financial problems. Instead, I calmly laid out everything I'd done. Every canceled reservation, every exposed lie, every anonymous tip. I showed them how I'd systematically dismantled their lives, just like they'd systematically stolen from me. The silence was deafening. Mom started crying, real tears this time. Dad's face went from red to white to green. My siblings looked like they'd been punched in the gut, but I wasn't done. I pulled out my laptop and showed them a draft email addressed to the IRS, the State Unemployment Office, and every other relevant authority. It contained everything, years of evidence that would result in audits, investigations, and potentially criminal charges. Here's the deal, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. You have 48 hours to return every penny of my $18,000. I don't care if you have to sell your cars, take out loans, or actually get jobs. You figure it out. Every penny, or this email gets sent. My brother tried to argue that they'd spent it all on the cruise. I pulled up screenshots of their social media showing new purchases made after the trip. Dad's motorcycle, Mom's kitchen renovation, my sister's new inventory for her boutique. They had assets. They just didn't want to give them up. But we're family, Mom whispered, trying one last manipulation. Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied. Family doesn't plan elaborate cons and laugh about it in group chats. Family doesn't exclude someone from vacations funded with their life savings. The 48 hours that followed were intense. They tried everything. Guilt, anger, threats to cut me off from the family, even attempting to hack into my accounts to delete the evidence. My sister posted vague messages on social media about toxic people and family betrayal. My brother showed up at my work trying to embarrass me in front of my colleagues. Mom sent flying monkeys, various relatives she'd convinced I was being unreasonable, but I held firm. I had backups of everything in multiple locations. I'd already told Jake and a few other trusted cousins the full story, so their attempts to paint me as the villain fell flat. The clock kept ticking. With 6 hours left on my deadline, they broke. The money started coming in. A wire transfer from my parents for $8,000, a cashier's check from my sister for $5,000, and finally, with just 30 minutes to spare, my brother showed up with $5,000 in cash that he'd gotten from selling his prized motorcycle. I counted every dollar in front of them. When I confirmed it was all there, I pulled up the draft email and deleted it, but I made sure they saw me save copies of everything to multiple drives first. This doesn't make us even, I said as they prepared to leave. This just means you won't go to jail. We're done as a family. Don't contact me for emergencies, real or fake. Don't invite me to holidays. Don't ask for favors. You called whatever relationship we had when you decided I was nothing more than a wallet to raid. Dad tried to salvage some dignity. You destroyed our lives over money. How does that make you any better than us? I looked him straight in the eye. I didn't destroy your lives. I just made you face the consequences of your choices. Every bit of fallout you're dealing with is from your own actions. I just stopped protecting you from them. They left without another word. In the weeks that followed, I heard through the grapevine about their struggles. My sister's boutique failed completely. My brother had to sell most of his tools to pay back the unemployment office. My parents were audited and had to pay substantial penalties. The extended family kept them at arm's length, no longer trusting anything they said. Meanwhile, I put my $18,000 back in my house fund and added to it over the following months. I finally bought my own place 6 months later, a small but perfect starter home where no family member has ever been invited. My credit score recovered, my stress levels dropped, and I learned the valuable lesson that sometimes the best family is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. The last I heard, they were still blaming each other for how everything fell apart. Mom insisted it was Dad's idea. Dad claimed my siblings pushed for it. My brother said my sister was too greedy. My sister accused my brother of being careless with the photos. None of them ever acknowledged that the real problem was their decision to steal from someone who'd only ever tried to help them. But that's not my problem anymore. They made their choices, and I made mine. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm free from the burden of being the family ATM. My bank account and my peace of mind have never been better. The weeks following their departure brought an unexpected calm to my life. I changed my locks, blocked their numbers, and finally started sleeping through the night without worrying about the next fabricated crisis. My coworkers noticed the difference immediately. I was showing up energized instead of exhausted from late-night emergency calls. My friend Kathy, who'd watched this family drama unfold for years, took me out to celebrate my newfound freedom with drinks at our favorite bar. That peaceful period lasted exactly 17 days. The first sign of trouble came through my work email. My boss forwarded me a message from someone claiming to be a concerned family friend who wanted to warn the company about my unstable behavior and vindictive tendencies. The email was anonymous, but I recognized Mom's writing style immediately, the same dramatic flair she'd used in those fake medical documents. She'd always had a habit of using too many adjectives when she was trying to sound official. I showed the email to my boss, explaining the family situation briefly. He'd known me for 5 years and wasn't buying their story, but it still made me nervous. If they were willing to go after my job, what else were they planning? The answer came 3 days later when my landlord called. Someone had reported that I was running an illegal business out of my apartment, claiming I had criminal associates coming and going at all hours. The complaint was anonymous, but the landlord mentioned the caller had sounded like an older man with a slight southern drawl, Dad's signature accent that came out when he was trying to sound authoritative. I had to let the landlord inspect my apartment, which he did with an apologetic expression. Finding nothing but my normal living space and home office setup, he dismissed the complaint. But now I had 2 strikes against me in places that mattered: my work and my home. My sister's attack came through social media. She created fake profiles and started commenting on every professional post I'd made, leaving subtle hints about my questionable ethics and family abandonment issues. She was careful not to say anything that could be traced directly back to her, but the damage was starting to add up. A potential client I'd been courting for months suddenly ghosted me after one of these comments appeared on my LinkedIn profile. My brother took a different approach. He started showing up at places he knew I frequented: my gym, my favorite coffee shop, the grocery store near my apartment. He never approached me directly, just lurked in the background with his phone out, obviously recording. When I confronted him once outside the gym, he claimed it was a public space and he had every right to be there. The gym manager, who knew us both, asked him to leave, but the harassment continued elsewhere. I started documenting everything, taking screenshots and keeping a detailed log of each incident. My friend Benjamin, who worked in IT security, helped me trace some of the fake social media accounts back to IP addresses I recognized. We found evidence linking them to my family members' devices, but nothing that would hold up legally. The escalation came when I received a package at work with no return address. Inside was a printed photo of me at the coffee shop, taken from my brother's stalking sessions, with the words, "We know where you go," written across it in red marker. My hands shook as I held it. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were trying to intimidate me into, what, giving them more money? Letting them back into my life? I took the package to the police, but they said without a direct threat of violence, there wasn't much they could do. The officer suggested I file for a restraining order, but warned me that family cases were complicated and often dismissed unless there was documented physical violence. That night, I installed security cameras around my apartment and changed my daily routines. I started working from home more often, varying my gym times, and avoiding predictable patterns. It felt like I was living in a spy movie, except the villains were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The next phase of their campaign hit me where it really hurt: my friends. My sister reached out to mutual acquaintances with a sob story about how I'd destroyed the family and stolen their life savings through manipulation. She claimed I'd hacked their accounts and fabricated evidence against them. Most people who knew me well didn't believe her, but some casual friends started distancing themselves, unsure what to believe. Kathy stood by me, as did Benjamin and a few others who'd seen my family's treatment of me over the years. But watching my social circle shrink because of their lies stung more than I expected. I'd already lost my family, now they were trying to take my friends too. The financial attacks resumed when I discovered someone had applied for credit cards in my name. 3 different applications, all rejected thanks to the fraud alerts I'd wisely placed on my credit reports months earlier. The applications had used my social security number and personal information that only family members would know. When I called the credit card companies, they confirmed the applications had been submitted from computers in my hometown, right where my parents lived. I spent hours on the phone with credit bureaus, filing fraud reports and adding extra security measures to my accounts. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my actual money, and now they were trying to steal my financial identity too. My brother's next move was particularly cruel. He contacted my ex-girlfriend Sarah, whom I'd dated for 2 years before the relationship ended amicably. He fed her a story about how I'd been hiding money from her her during our relationship and suggested she might have legal grounds to sue me for financial deception. Sarah called me, confused and concerned, and I had to spend an awkward hour explaining my family's latest scheme. She didn't buy their story, but the fact that they dragged her into this mess infuriated me. The psychological warfare continued for weeks. Mysterious calls to my workplace asking about my schedule. Food deliveries I hadn't ordered showing up at my apartment at 3 a.m. My car tires deflated twice. Not slashed, just deflated, so I couldn't prove vandalism. Magazine subscriptions I hadn't ordered started arriving, all with invoices that would eventually go to collections if I didn't catch them. I was exhausted from the constant vigilance, the need to check every account, verify every charge, question every interaction. This was what they wanted, to wear me down until I either gave in or made a mistake they could exploit. The breaking point came when Mom showed up at my apartment building. She didn't try to enter or knock on my door. Instead, she sat in the lobby for hours, telling anyone who would listen about her heartless son who had abandoned his sick mother. The building's security eventually asked her to leave, but not before several of my neighbors had heard her performance. That night, I called Jake. He'd been keeping me updated on the family situation from his perspective, and what he told me was illuminating. My parents were hemorrhaging money trying to maintain their lifestyle without my regular contributions. The Crews had maxed out their credit cards, and without their usual under-the-table income streams, they were struggling. My sister's boutique had officially closed, leaving her with thousands in debt to suppliers. My brother had lost several clients after the unemployment investigation became known in his circle. They weren't harassing me just for revenge. They were desperate. The money I'd forced them to return had come from selling assets they couldn't afford to lose. Dad's motorcycle had been his only reliable transportation for side jobs. My brother's tools were essential for his car repair business. My sister's inventory had been her only hope of reviving her boutique, but instead of admitting their mistakes or trying to rebuild honestly, they'd chosen to double down on making me the villain. Jake told me they'd been calling extended family members, trying to borrow money with increasingly wild stories about why they needed it. Most relatives, now aware of the Crews scam, weren't biting. I realized I needed to go on the offensive again. Playing defense was exhausting and reactive. If they wanted a war of attrition, I'd give them one they couldn't win. I started with research. Every public record, every social media post, every financial trail they'd left over the years. Benjamin helped me use legal tools to gather information. Nothing illegal, just thorough. We found patterns I hadn't noticed before. Dad had a gambling problem he'd hidden well, with regular cash withdrawals matching the dates of poker games at a nearby casino. Mom had been selling items on online marketplaces, items that looked suspiciously like things that had gone missing from relatives' houses over the years. My sister had a history of starting and abandoning online businesses, leaving a trail of unhappy customers and unpaid debts. Armed with this information, I crafted a careful strategy. I wouldn't sink to their level with harassment or lies. Instead, I'd use truth as my weapon. I created a simple website, nothing fancy, just a clean layout with a timeline of events. I posted the screenshots from their group chat planning the fake surgery, the Crews photos with timestamps, the fake medical bills they'd created. I included a section called Patterns of Deception that documented, with evidence, their history of financial manipulation going back years. Everything was factual, documented, and presented without emotion or editorializing. I didn't share the website publicly or promote it on social media. Instead, I sent the link privately to every extended family member who'd been contacted by my parents for money. I sent it to the church they'd scammed. I sent it to my brother's client base through a carefully worded email that simply said, "You may want to know who you're doing business with." The effect was immediate. My Aunt Catherine called me within hours, horrified by what she'd read. She'd been considering lending them money for what they claimed was a mortgage payment, but now understood it was likely for gambling debts or credit card bills. Other relatives shared similar stories. Each had been approached with different emergencies, all urgently needing thousands of dollars. My brother's remaining clients started canceling appointments. One sent him a message saying they couldn't trust someone who'd participated in defrauding his own brother. My sister received notices from several online marketplaces that her selling accounts had been suspended due to customer complaints that had been filed after people saw the website and connected her to previous scams. The church formally banned my parents from the premises and demanded repayment of the donations they'd received under false pretenses. The pastor sent a letter that was CC'd to me, expressing deep disappointment in their deception and manipulation of the congregation's goodwill, but I wasn't prepared for their next move. If they couldn't attack me directly or through my relationships, they'd go after my future. I'd been in the process of closing on my house when suddenly, the mortgage company called with concerns. They'd received an anonymous tip that I'd lied on my application, that my down payment was obtained through illegal means, that I had hidden debts and financial obligations. None of it was true, but it triggered a review that delayed my closing by 3 weeks while I provided documentation to refute each claim. The stress of potentially losing my dream home after everything else was almost too much. I spent sleepless nights gathering bank statements, tax returns, and employment records to prove my financial stability. My real estate agent, who'd been patient throughout the process, warned me that the seller was getting nervous about the delays. That's when Jake provided crucial help. He'd been recording conversations with my parents where they bragged about sabotaging my mortgage application. They didn't know he was documenting their admissions, thinking he was sympathetic to their cause. He sent me the audio files, which I immediately forwarded to my lawyer. The mortgage company, faced with evidence of deliberate interference, expedited my application. The closing went through, but the experience had shaken me. They were willing to destroy my future to punish me for demanding my money back. Moving day arrived with a mix of relief and anxiety. I hired professional movers and didn't tell anyone except Kathy and Benjamin the exact date. I'd learned to be paranoid about sharing any personal information that could be used against me. As I watched my belongings being loaded into the truck, I felt like I was escaping a war zone. My new home was in a different part of the city, far from my family's usual haunts. It had a security system, cameras, and most importantly, an address they didn't know. I'd even used an LLC to purchase it, adding an extra layer of privacy protection. The first night in my new home should have been celebratory. Instead, I found myself checking security cameras and double-checking locks. The psychological toll of months of harassment had left me jumpy and paranoid. Every car that slowed down outside made my heart race. Every unknown number calling my phone sent my anxiety spiking. But I wasn't the only one suffering. Jake reported that my family's situation had deteriorated rapidly. Without Without their various income streams and with their reputations destroyed in their community, they were facing genuine financial hardship, the kind they'd only pretended to have before. Dad had been forced to take a legitimate job at a hardware store, his first regular employment in years. The humiliation of working retail at his age, after years of bragging about being his own boss, was eating at him. Mom had applied for work at various craft stores, but her reputation for selling fake handmade items preceded her. My sister was working at a call center, a far cry from her dreams of being a successful boutique owner. My brother had sold his truck and was taking the bus to what remained of his client base. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. Then I remembered the group chat messages, the months of harassment, the attempts to destroy my career and relationships. They'd created this situation entirely on their own. The final straw in their campaign came through the mail. A thick envelope with no return address contained printed screenshots of every personal photo I'd ever shared on social media, going back years. Pictures with friends, vacation photos, professional headshots, all printed out with disturbing messages written on them. We're watching. You can't hide forever. Family is forever. This time, the police took it seriously. The messages constituted a clear threat, and combined with my documentation of previous incidents, I finally had enough for a restraining order. The process was draining. Court appearances, testimony, reliving the entire saga for a judge. But when the orders were granted against all four of them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. They were legally required to stay away from me, my home, and my workplace. Any contact would result in arrest. It wasn't perfect protection, but it was something. The restraining orders seemed to finally break through their delusion that they could harass me into submission. The reality of potential jail time if they continued their campaign made them reconsider their tactics. The messages stopped. The fake social media accounts went silent. My brother stopped showing up at my regular places, but I knew this wasn't over. People who could plan a 6-month con against their own son and brother don't just give up. They regroup, they plan, they wait for the right moment to strike again. I used the respite to fortify my position. I changed jobs, moving to a company in a different industry where their connections couldn't reach. I legally changed my phone number and only gave it to trusted friends. I removed myself from all social media platforms, deciding that digital privacy was worth more than online connectivity. Most importantly, I started therapy. The trauma of being betrayed by my entire immediate family, followed by months of harassment and stalking, had left deeper scars than I'd admitted. My therapist helped me understand that their behavior wasn't my fault, that setting boundaries wasn't cruel, and that protecting myself wasn't selfish. Through therapy, I also began to understand the dynamics that had led to this situation. My role as the family ATM hadn't developed overnight. It had been carefully cultivated through years of manipulation and guilt. Every time I'd given money, I'd reinforced their belief that I existed to serve their financial needs. The cruise scam wasn't an aberration. It was the logical culmination of a pattern they'd established over decades. But understanding didn't mean forgiving. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Some relationships become too toxic to salvage. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to play the game anymore. As I settled into my new life, I heard updates through Jake and other relatives. My family had formed their own narrative about what had happened. In their version, I was a vindictive son who'd overreacted to a harmless prank. They'd conveniently forgotten the months of planning, the fake medical emergency, the mockery in their group chat. They painted themselves as victims of my cruelty, forced into poverty by my unreasonable demands. Some distant relatives bought their story. Others saw through it. I stopped caring about controlling the narrative. Those who knew me understood the truth. Those who didn't weren't worth convincing. The restraining orders would expire eventually. They might try to reestablish contact, might concoct new schemes or manipulations, but I was ready now. I had legal documentation, security measures, and most importantly, the hard-won knowledge that family isn't defined by blood, but by behavior. My new life wasn't perfect. I still had trust issues that affected new relationships. I still checked my security cameras more often than necessary. I still felt a pang of loss when I saw other families enjoying normal relationships, but I was free from the cycle of exploitation and manipulation that had defined my adult life. The money I'd saved by not funding their latest emergency grew steadily. My house became a home, filled with peace instead of drama. My career flourished without the constant distraction of manufactured crises. I built new friendships with people who valued me for more than my bank account. Most surprisingly, I found myself becoming someone I actually liked. Without the constant pressure to sacrifice my needs for others' wants, I discovered my own interests and priorities. I took up hobbies I'd never had time for before. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see but couldn't afford after funding their emergencies. I learned that saying no wasn't selfish, it was necessary. The last indirect contact came through Jake 6 months after the restraining orders were issued. My parents had been evicted from their rental house for non-payment. They were moving in with my sister, who was herself struggling to make rent. My brother had left town entirely, chasing construction work in another state. The family that had once planned elaborate schemes together was fracturing under the weight of their own choices. Jake asked if I felt guilty about their situation. I thought about it carefully before answering. Did I feel guilty? Did I feel sad? Perhaps, but not for them. For the family we could have been if they'd chosen differently. They'd had every opportunity to build honest relationships and legitimate success. Instead, they'd chosen manipulation and deceit. Their current struggles weren't my responsibility or my fault. They were the natural consequences of a lifetime of poor choices finally catching up with them. I'd simply stopped shielding them from those consequences. As I sat in my peaceful home, reviewing security footage that showed nothing but suburban tranquility, I realized something important. The best revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's building your own life so well that their absence improves it. Every day I woke up without dreading a manipulative phone call was a victory. Every month I saved money without funding someone else's poor decisions was progress. They thought they were so clever with their cruise scheme, their group chat mockery, their elaborate con, but in the end, their cleverness had cost them everything. Their son, their reputation, their financial stability, and eventually, each other. Meanwhile, I'd gained something invaluable, freedom from the toxic cycle that had trapped me for so long. The war wasn't over, might never be truly over, but I'd won the battle that mattered most, the battle for my own life and future, and that victory was worth more than any amount of money they could have stolen. The restraining orders had given me breathing room, but I knew my family too well to believe they'd simply accept defeat. They'd spent their entire lives manipulating situations to their advantage. This was just another obstacle to overcome in their minds. The first test came 3 weeks later. I was grocery shopping when I noticed a woman following me through the aisles. She wasn't being subtle about it, constantly checking her phone and glancing my way. When I doubled back through the produce section, she did too. I abandoned my cart and left through a different exit, watching from my car as she frantically searched the parking lot. Later that evening, Jake called with interesting news. My parents had hired a private investigator to track my movements and find my new address. The woman at the grocery store matched the description of someone who'd been asking questions around my old neighborhood. They were burning through what little money they had left trying to find ways around the restraining orders. I contacted my lawyer immediately. While hiring a PI wasn't technically violating the order, it was clearly an attempt to circumvent it. He sent them a cease and desist letter, warning that any information gathered would be considered stalking if acted upon. The PI dropped the case within days, apparently unwilling to risk her license for whatever my parents were paying, but they weren't done. My sister had found a loophole. The restraining order didn't cover written communication through third parties. She started sending letters to my workplace addressed to current resident, with my name in smaller text, hoping they'd be delivered without triggering legal consequences. The letters were masterpieces of manipulation, alternating between tearful apologies and subtle threats about family secrets she might be forced to reveal. I documented every letter, scanning them before shredding the contents. My lawyer added them to our growing file, noting that while technically legal, they showed a pattern of continued harassment. He suggested we might be able to extend the restraining orders based on this behavior, but I wanted to see how far they'd push things first. The answer came when my brother attempted the boldest move yet. He'd discovered that the restraining order only covered direct contact with me. It didn't prevent him from visiting my workplace during business hours as a potential customer. He showed up at my new company claiming to need our services, scheduling meetings with various departments to evaluate our offerings. My boss, who I'd briefed on the family situation, was not amused. Security footage showed my brother taking photos of employee directories, noting car license plates in the parking lot, and asking pointed questions about work schedules. When confronted by security, he produced documentation showing he was technically a legitimate potential client who'd followed all visitor protocols. It was clever, but not clever enough. My company's legal department got involved, sending him a formal letter banning him from the premises for suspicious behavior unrelated to legitimate business purposes. They also shared the security footage with my lawyer, who filed for an expansion of the restraining order to include my workplace explicitly. The hearing for the expanded order revealed just how desperate they'd become. My brother showed up representing himself, arguing that he had every right to explore business opportunities wherever he chose. The judge, reviewing months of documentation, disagreed. The restraining order was not only expanded, but extended for an additional 2 years. That's when things took an unexpected turn. My Aunt Catherine, who'd been following the situation closely, called with shocking news. She'd been cleaning out her elderly mother's house and found something disturbing. Jewelry that had gone missing from various family members over the years, all hidden in a box labeled with my mother's maiden name. The pieces started falling into place. Those family gatherings where things would mysteriously disappear, always blamed on careless children or outside workers. The way Mom always seemed to have money for small luxuries despite their supposed poverty. The pattern of theft went back decades, long before I was even born. Catherine was furious. She'd lost her grandmother's pearl necklace at a Christmas gathering 5 years ago, devastating her because it was meant to be passed down to her daughter. Now she found it hidden in her own mother's house, clearly placed there by my mother during one of her visits. Word spread through the extended family like wildfire. Other relatives started comparing notes, realizing that valuable items had gone missing whenever my parents visited. The cousin who'd lost his father's watch, the aunt whose antique silver disappeared, the uncle whose coin collection vanished during a family reunion, all of it traced back to my parents' presence. The family confrontation that followed was epic, though I only heard about it secondhand through Jake. 17 relatives descended on my parents' current residence, my sister's cramped apartment, demanding answers and the return of stolen property. Mom tried her usual tears and denials, but faced with Catherine's evidence and the collective memory of the family, her fabrications crumbled. The scope of their theft was staggering. Over 30 years, they'd systematically stolen from every branch of the family tree, selling items for cash while maintaining their facade of poverty. The very relatives they'd begged money from had already been robbed by them repeatedly. My sister, whose apartment was being searched by increasingly angry relatives, finally snapped. She revealed that she'd known about the thefts for years, but kept quiet in exchange for a cut of the profits. Her online boutique had been partially stocked with items stolen from family members, which she'd sold to strangers across the country. The family gave them an ultimatum: return everything that could be returned, pay restitution for what had been sold, or face criminal charges. Catherine, still furious about her grandmother's necklace, was particularly adamant about involving the police. Watching from a distance, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This wasn't just about the cruise money anymore. It was about a lifetime of deception being exposed. The family that had mocked me for being gullible had been systematically victimizing everyone around them for decades. The pressure finally broke them. Dad, facing potential charges for theft spanning multiple decades, turned on Mom completely. He claimed she'd masterminded everything, that he'd just gone along to keep peace in the marriage. Mom retaliated by revealing Dad's gambling debts were 3 times larger than anyone knew, funded by the stolen goods. My brother, watching his parents' marriage implode while living in his sister's living room, made a desperate play. He reached out to me through a mutual acquaintance, offering to share information about our parents' crimes in exchange for me dropping the restraining order and lending him money to start over in another state. I declined through my lawyer, but his desperation gave me an idea. I contacted Catherine and suggested she might want to know about Dad's hidden gambling accounts, the ones I'd discovered during my research. She was very interested, especially when I explained how he'd been siphoning family money for years to fund his casino trips. The information spread through the family network within hours. Relatives who'd been sympathetic to Dad's claims of being Mom's unwilling accomplice suddenly saw him differently. The uncle who'd loaned him money for car repairs realized it had gone straight to the poker table. The cousin who'd helped with a medical emergency discovered it coincided with a major gambling loss. Yes, the family's financial forensics revealed the true extent of their deception. Between the thefts, the gambling, the fake emergencies, and the various scams, my parents had stolen close to $200,000 from the extended family over 3 decades. The cruise I'd funded was just the latest in a long line of cons. My sister, facing eviction for harboring criminals and unable to maintain rent without her parents' contribution, made one last attempt to salvage something. She created a GoFundMe claiming she was an innocent victim of her parents' crimes, needing help to start over. She conveniently forgot to mention her own involvement in the thefts and her current legal troubles. I forwarded the link to Catherine, who was maintaining a family-wide communication network about the situation. Within hours, the fundraiser was flooded with comments from relatives exposing her role in the crimes. She took it down within a day, having raised exactly $0. The extended family's response was swift and coordinated. They filed police reports in multiple jurisdictions, documenting decades of theft. They shared evidence across state lines, building a comprehensive case. They froze out anyone who tried to defend or assist my immediate family. My parents, now facing actual criminal charges rather than just family disapproval, made increasingly desperate moves. Mom tried to claim mental illness, saying she had a compulsion to steal. Dad insisted he was developing dementia and couldn't be held responsible. My siblings scrambled to distance themselves from their parents while simultaneously begging relatives for money to hire lawyers. Jake kept me informed of each development, but I maintained my distance. The restraining orders were still in effect, and I had no intention of getting pulled back into their chaos. My life had finally achieved the peace I'd always wanted, and I wasn't going to sacrifice that for the satisfaction of watching their downfall in person. The criminal cases proceeded slowly, but inevitably. The evidence was overwhelming, documented across decades by the very family members they'd victimized. Plea deals were offered and rejected as each family member tried to shift blame to the others. My brother, facing his own charges for the unemployment fraud I'd exposed, fled the state entirely. He left behind angry creditors, a furious ex-girlfriend who discovered he'd stolen from her too, and a warrant for his arrest. The last anyone heard, he was working under the table at a construction site 3 states away, constantly looking over his shoulder. My sister's business liquidation revealed even more victims. Customers who'd bought handmade items came forward, demanding refunds for what turned out to be mass-produced imports. Her supplier contracts showed she owed thousands to overseas manufacturers. The state attorney general's office opened a consumer fraud investigation. The family home, the one they'd claimed was at risk when they needed my money, turned out to have been sold years earlier. They'd been renting it back from the new owners while pretending they still owned it, another lie in their web of deception. The real owners, learning about the criminal cases, began eviction proceedings immediately. Mom and Dad, now living in separate weekly motels paid for by court-mandated victim restitution funds, turned their manipulation tactics on each other. Mom filed for divorce, claiming spousal abuse. Dad countered with claims of financial abuse. Both tried to hide assets from each other, not realizing they had no assets left to hide. The extended family established a restitution fund, pooling resources to hire a forensic accountant. They traced every theft, every scam, every diverted dollar. The final tally was staggering, nearly $250,000 over 30 years, not counting interest or emotional damages. I received regular updates through Jake, but stayed focused on my own life. My new job was going well, with a promotion on the horizon. My house had become a real home, decorated with items I'd bought with honestly earned money. My friendships, tested by my family's harassment campaign, had grown stronger. The last direct impact on my life came when the criminal cases required my testimony. I appeared via video link, maintaining the restraining order boundaries while providing evidence about the cruise scam. Seeing my family on the courtroom monitor, haggard, angry, still blaming everyone but themselves, only reinforced that I'd made the right choice. Mom was convicted of multiple counts of theft and fraud, receiving 5 years probation and mandatory restitution. Dad got 3 years probation for his role, plus court-ordered gambling addiction treatment. My sister received 2 years probation for consumer fraud and was banned from operating any business for 10 years. My brother remained a fugitive, with warrants in multiple states. The extended family's victory was Pyrrhic. They recovered some stolen items and got court-ordered restitution, but most of the money was gone forever. The emotional toll of discovering decades of betrayal by trusted family members left scars that would never fully heal. As for me, I marked the conclusion of the legal proceedings by doing something I'd wanted to do for years. I took a real vacation, not a rushed weekend trip squeezed between family emergencies, but 2 full weeks in Europe, paid for with money I'd saved by not funding their latest crisis. Standing in a small cafe in Prague, reading Jake's message about the final sentencing, I felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. They'd stolen my money, attacked my life, and tried to destroy my future. But in the end, their own choices had been their downfall. I'd simply stopped enabling them and let reality take its course. The waiter asked if I wanted another coffee. I smiled, checked my bank balance, healthy and growing, and ordered another round. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. No fake emergencies, no guilt trips, no manipulation. Just me, my choices, and a future that belonged entirely to me. The best revenge really was living well, honestly, independently, and completely free from their toxic influence. They'd thought they were so clever, planning their elaborate schemes, but they'd never understood the simplest truth. You can't build a life on lies and theft. Eventually, it all comes crashing down. Mine was just beginning to soar.